Hi, and welcome to the next webinar in our Plantae webinar series. My name is Katie Rogers, and I'm your host for today's webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few things just to make sure you get the most out of attending today's webinar. If you're experiencing technical issues, please let us know about those using the chat box or by emailing me at krogers@aspb.org. If you have questions for our panelists during today's webinar, please let us know using the GoToWebinar chat box. We moderate these questions and we'll read them aloud to our panelists as we transition from one topic to the next. This webinar series is brought to you today by Plantae, the open online community for plant scientists, powered by the American Society of Plant Biologists. I'd like to give a special thank you to all of our ASPB members who are attending today. Your ASPB membership dues help support and make these webinars possible. For any of you who have not yet joined ASPB, you can join today to support this series and use the discount code webinar10 to receive a 10% discount on registration. ASPB members get early access to these webinars. You can learn more about ASPB and the opportunities we provide at aspb.org. If you are having trouble connecting or need to leave the webinar early, do know that a recording of this webinar will be made available along with the associated materials within a few days. Be sure to follow us on social media and you can ask questions there as well. The hashtag for this series is PlantaeWebinar. This webinar was coordinated by ASPB's Women in Plant Biology Committee. You can join their group on Plantae to contribute to discussions and find and share resources. Eva Farr, who is an associate professor in the Department of Plant Biology at Michigan State University and a member of the Women in Plant Biology Committee, is here with us today to introduce today's topic and moderate our discussion. Thanks for joining us, Eva. I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Okay. Is it? I clicked up. Oh,
There we go.
Oh, yeah. 1 second. I need to pull up my slides here.
Yep, we see your slides. It just needs to be in the presenter mode.
And then I see my slide small. Can I start it? Okay. So can you see the slides okay?
Yep, we just see them in the edit mode rather than in presenter mode. So you should be able to click the slideshow button down on the bottom right.
Sorry, I'm not. Sorry, Katie, where is it? Oh, here. Sorry, I don't find where's the presenter mode.
Yeah, it should be within your PowerPoint slide itself.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry.
The slides. There you go.
Okay, yep. Here we are. Took a little bit, but I'm good. So welcome all to today's webinar on parenting for scientists in training. I want to first go over the acknowledgements. So first, I want to thank the panelists that will introduce themselves now in a little bit. Kelly Gillespie, Lucas McKinnon, Swathi Nada Kuduti, and Scott Warner. I would like to thank Katie and Crispin for help organizing the webinar series, and the other members in the Plant Biology Committee. So this webinar series was spearheaded by initiative by Kelly and Grace. And this is the 6th webinar in our series, I believe. Okay, so I would like first to have the panelists maybe briefly introduce themselves so that the audience can have an idea of who they could ask questions to, and then I will provide a short introduction on the topic. So Swati?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Swati Nadakuduti. I recently started as a new faculty at University of Florida. I did my PhD and postdoc at Michigan State University. So yeah, I'm really happy to be a panelist in this webinar. I think it's really important for parents to navigate through this, through a phase in their career, and this could be useful. And I had my first kid during my PhD, and then a second kid during my postdoc period, and kids have been part of my life along with science. So feel free to reach out for any questions you may have. And again, I thank you for having me here.
Kelly?
Sure, yeah, so Kelly Gillespie here. I lead the corn crop efficiency portfolio for global R&D at Bayer Crop Science. I got my PhD at University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, and had my daughter during my first year of my PhD. So similar to Satya, I've had science and kids in my life, I've had kids in my life my entire scientific sort of training and career. I did a postdoc at the Danforth Center, and then became a scientist at Monsanto, which was recently acquired by Bayer. So I've had sort of successive positions and leadership positions throughout the course of my career here at Bayer. And yeah, again, I think this is a really important topic, and look forward to the discussion.
Lucas?
Sure. Hi, I'm Lucas McKinnon. I recently got my PhD from UC Davis in plant biology. I'm going to be starting as a protein scientist at Bayer in a month or so. I had both my kids during grad school, my first one right after my first year, and then my second one somewhere around my fourth year. So like the other two that have spoke so far, I've pretty much been a parent the entire time I've been a practicing scientist. And it was a really challenging experience, but really provided a lot of opportunity for growth in ways that I never would have expected. So I'm really excited to be a part of this and offer whatever perspective and advice I can.
Thank you. Scott?
Scott Warner. I'm a dendrochronologist and field botanist. I'm in year 5 of my PhD program. I can say that for a couple more months. And then I hope to graduate this next year, so 6 years. We had my daughter in, I think it was about year 3 of my program, and now we're expecting a second daughter in September. So I did about half my program as a non-parent and doing about half of it as a parent. And it's been a wonderful experience to be a father in graduate school. I think there's a lot of advantages to doing it at that time, but there's also a lot of opportunity costs that you should be aware of. And so it's good to be here to discuss that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So, can you see my slides now? No.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I just want to give a couple of slides of introduction on the topic, and hopefully you can think about them questions for the panelists. I just want to say that having children for me should be a choice without too many negative repercussions. It doesn't mean that it's easy at any life stage, but it seems that I just found this data here on the right side. I don't know if you see my mouse. In 1994, only about 65% of women that had PhD had children, but now recently that number has increased a lot, meaning that at least women don't have to choose between doing science and being mothers. Of course, we don't know how many of these female PhD actually still do science, because as a quote I found from NSF said that family formation is one of the main challenges and one of the main reasons many female scientists drop out of the scientific workforce. So hopefully we can discuss here now forms of promoting parenthood without inhibiting your scientific career. So as we briefly discussed before with the panelists, there's never a perfect time to be a parent, but I think there are some joys and challenges of doing it at any stage. So there's a lot of advantages of not waiting until you have tenure to get on with your family. There's biological reasons for females. There's higher fertility and less risky pregnancies. You have much more flexibility of how many kids you want to have long term. One point is that you will be parents with more energy. The grandparents will have more energy because they will be younger too, and you're more likely to see your grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And actually, the type of jobs that graduate students and postdocs do in general, we have quite a lot of flexible working hours in a sense. And one of the things I learned from brief discussions with the panelists is that you learn early on to do more work-life balance, which is actually a positive thing. So of course, there are challenges. There are challenges being a parent at any time. There's risk of lab and field work if you're a female scientist and you're pregnant. You might have a difficult pregnancy or childbirth, and that might cause some physical disability, and you might not be able to work. Of course, after the children are here, you are ready at first to have other physical challenges for fathers and mothers. Is a lack of sleep, and for mothers is also the limited opportunities for breastfeeding, maybe at your workplace. There are psychological challenges. You have less time. The flexibility of our jobs to be open-ended can also be a challenge because you feel like you should be working all the time. So it's harder to set the boundaries there. And if you have your children early on, you might have fewer friends that are in that position. So it might be harder to network with parents of your age. The main challenges, I think, for scientists in training are economic challenges. So there's limited family leave, and we will discuss. I want to discuss that in more detail in the next couple of slides. In general, salaries are quite low, and childcare is expensive and is not so easy to find, particularly for small children. And of course, you have more job insecurity. And here, there are just some brief recommendations that I found about dealing with these challenges. So the take-home message overall is that you should always ask for help and support while being pregnant or having children or taking care of your family. So there shouldn't be any reason why lab work should be dangerous, although in reports for postdocs have brought out that there are labs where there are few accommodations for female scientists that might be more dangerous jobs in the lab. So you need to remember that OSHA sets health rules for lab work, and you should always be able to ask for support for your colleagues and PIs. For example, when I was a postdoc and I was doing experiments with a colleague of mine who was just pregnant, I was doing all the chemical dangerous stuff and she was doing all the other things. So we kind of split the work in a way that she felt more comfortable doing. Breastfeeding is not that easy if you don't have your office. I think newer buildings have better capabilities and have rooms specially for that, but that might be a bit challenging. Make sure you ask your PI or your work-life balance office at your institution for space for being able to breastfeed. Remember that your health insurance might be able to cover some of the costs for pumps, etc. And it's always good to network with other parents to share materials and tips and tricks. So where is a good spot to breastfeed and to pump, for example. The lack of time is a challenge for any parent, and but it's having kids early on is a good opportunity to start aligning your career goals with your time and your family goals with your time. And remember, there might be free training available from your institution, and that's always positive in for any career choices that you will make. For childcare for small children is quite costly. So there might be opportunities for supplemental funding, either from your funding agency or from your institution. Being a parent, particularly if you have restricted economic, funding opportunities, you might need to do some digging and finding some supplemental funding for these cases. For example, while researching for this, I found that in the UC system, they might have some funding pockets for childcare for graduate students and postdocs. Okay, so one of the main challenges for any parent here in the United States, but particularly for graduate students and postdocs, is how do you fund your parental leave? And during my research, I found that in general, don't assume that your HR office has all of the right information. They, in general, in my experience, they just tick the boxes, but they're often not so helpful as I expect they should be. However, your institution might have a work-life balance office or some similarly named office that might help you find the funding opportunities for you. And other offices that might be helpful are your postdoc association office, for example, and things like that. So you need to also know your rights. The Family and Medical Leave Act states that most employees, graduate students probably don't fall into that category, are able to take up to 12 weeks of leave. Of course, this leave is unpaid, which really doesn't help so much. But I think this is important to remember that's your right. It's also important to know that Title IX and Title VII outlaws any discrimination based on sex or family status. But of course, these laws per se doesn't provide you funding, but they might provide you a good argument of why you should be able to get some funding from somebody. So how do you support your leave? In some institutions, they have disability insurance, and they might cover leave for staff, and many postdocs might fall into that category. However, the common situation is the following. If you are a postdoc or a graduate student and you are either on your PI's grant or you have your own fellowship, most of the time people just take sick or vacation time for your leave. and basically they are just continuing as if nothing happens, and they're just continuing being paid. However, that provides, in my opinion, a strong disincentive for PIs to support trainees that are parents, because basically you will have somebody not working for 3 months that you are paying, and at the end you need to get the research done. That's kind of the view of the PI in my view. And there's also, if you have your own fellowship, it means that you will not be working for your fellowship for 3 months. And that might cause also a decrease in your, during that period, a decrease in your productivity. That means that in many cases, there's not an extension of these funding opportunities. And here on the right, I have this data that I found in a general national postdoc survey. And this is data from fathers asking for leave, and how much was the percentage of cases where the PI's response had a negative impact on the relationship with the mentee. So the minimum 1 out of 10 of was at least of postdocs had a bad outcome. That negative outcome was higher for minorities. So this system is really, it does a disservice for a lot of postdocs. And I think there might be some ways around it. Okay, so what I found is that if you are paid by NIH, not many plan people do, but they have a much better organized family leave policy. So they have a 8-week leave, and if you have any funding, either your PI or you have a fellowship, you can apply for funded extensions. So basically your funding for your family leave. NSF doesn't pay directly for leave. Once I asked a program officer of their thoughts about parental leave, and they thought that the institution should pay for parental leave from the indirect costs that they get from the NSF, which I think is a good idea, but most institutions don't do it. But I also found that institutions could apply to the NSF for extra funding to pay for family leave if they have a student that has an NSF grant. So there are some opportunities there to request funding. And it is also possible for PIs to ask for supplemental funding for additional health personnel while one of the group members is on family leave. I just want to mention that several fellowship organizations, that these are for postdoctoral programs, they do, these are international fellowships, and they provide up to 3 months paid fellowship extension. So the take-home message is that you should ask for additional support that might help with it, support your leave. A special case are graduate teaching assistants. So in general, they're hourly employees and they have no granted paid leave. But here again, it might be useful to talk to your institution, your work-life balance office, or your graduate school for help during this time. And here's again some data from that postdoctoral survey about mothers and fathers that ask for leave. So on the left side are the mothers that request maternity leave, and most of the PIs were encouraging, or at least had no negative impact on the relationship with the postdoc. That means in any case, you should be able to ask for leave, and in general, those leaves are accepted. Here for fathers on the right side, not as many fathers ask for leave, but from the fathers that do ask for leave, most of them are granted leave. So that's kind of quite encouraging, and hopefully things are moving in the right direction. So this is actually my last slide. I would like to open now the discussion. Okay. I don't know if Katie has any questions already there for the panelists.
Eva, I was just wondering during your slides, and not many of us end up in academia after your PhD. Most of them go to the private workforce, like industries. And how is it in industries? How is the and how are new moms treated in industry setup is something that that might be useful for people to know.
Yeah, maybe Kelly can.
Kelly, are you muted?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I could probably answer that, although I didn't have my daughter while at Bayer, but plenty of my friends have had children over the years of me being here. So Bayer in particular has a very, I would say, generous and standard sort of parental leave. It's 6 weeks paid leave, and then the additional FMLA if kind of needed or sort of complications arise, or and then that is in addition to your vacation. So most entry-level scientists have a number of weeks of vacation, kind of depending on the role, and so that vacation plus your 6 weeks parental leave, plus FMLA can sort of sustain a variety of situations. But yeah, I think in industry, it's much more similar to really any kind of any workplace. It's really rather maybe not ideal in the academic space, which hopefully is changing.
So yeah, if there are no questions.
Yeah, we don't have questions.
We don't? Okay, go ahead.
Oh, we don't yet, but there is a chat box for all those listening, so be sure to put any questions that you may have in there. In the meantime, I am wondering like how each one of you kind of dealt with the situation. I know some of you are, nearing the end of grad school, or kind of early faculty positions. So how did it work, like in each of your cases? Maybe we can start with some of the graduate students, Lucas or Scott.
Could you kind of rephrase? I guess I'm not sure exactly the question that you're asking.
I guess like the question is, did you get any leave at all, or how did you navigate the, after your kids were first born?
Yeah, well, my experience, so I actually ended up having 2 different advisors during my graduate career. My first advisor passed away halfway through my graduate career. But anyway, my first advisor, he did not have any kids, and I think he had very little, if any, understanding of what it was like to be a parent and to be a scientist at the same time. And so I think that caused a lot of challenges. With regard to leave, I wasn't sure like how, I didn't know if any of these resources that Eva has covered so far when I was getting ready to have my first child, or really when my wife was getting ready to. I didn't know about leave options, and so I just told my advisor, like, well, I'm going to take 2 weeks. Like, is that okay? Well, actually, when I asked him, he said, so when are you going to be back? Like, that's how he put it, is like, he came across as like, you need to be back in the lab. How long is this going to take for you to get back to the work that you need to be doing? And so that was, I don't know, I think I was really naive early on, and I didn't really know how to go about that and how to, I guess I didn't know that I had any negotiating power, because I didn't know like of any of the leave options and rights that we have as graduate students. But my second advisor, he had 3 kids, so it was much different when I asked for leave, and he really encouraged me to go take more leave than I had planned. And so that was, yeah, that was a good contrast and learning experience for me.
Maybe Scott, how? I don't know if you, Scott, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, you were cutting in and out, but I can take a stab at this. I can take a stab at this one. So when my child was born, I took like a week or 2 off. And I think it just depends on your advisor and the other people with whom you're working. I was on fellowship at the time, so I didn't have any teaching assistant obligations. And my advisor has a very laissez-faire attitude, so he was very supportive. And I was more or less able to take as much time as I wanted. However, my wife was on paid maternity herself through work, so there was really no reason for me to spent too much time at home at first. So I went back to work pretty on and then stepped up and helped out later on once my wife had to go back to work. So she was able to take 3 months, but once that's over, that can be a very challenging period for young parents. So what we had to do is my wife's work is also pretty flexible. So she was able to take the baby into her work part of the time and, you know, partially watch the child and partially get stuff done in the office. And then I would go into work very, very early in the morning and then come back about noon and pick up the child and watch her the rest of the time. Because you really can't put your child in daycare until they're maybe like 10 months old or so, depending on the daycare institution. So that's how long that we had to wait. And then you finally get some relief and can sort of hire some of that childcare out and get back to work yourself to a more full extent. But even then, you're always going to have to build in flexibility into your schedule. If your child gets sick, you might need to stay home with her for a few days. If your car breaks down when you're supposed to go pick her up from daycare. So there's a variety of things that change permanently once you become a parent, and that can be a challenge.
Kelly, how did you organize your leave?
Yeah, so I actually was on a fellowship as well, so didn't have the teaching duties yet. I did TA later during my PhD, but actually my advisor, she didn't have kids yet, although that was sort of, she wanted to have kids, so was very actually she had her first daughter right as I was graduating, so it was kind of an interesting. She was my mentor, but then I had kids, and then she had kids later, so we're quite good friends. But actually that semester, so I had my daughter in December, which actually kind of worked out because then you sort of have the winter break, a little bit to get yourself, kind of, oh, life's different now. Then I took classes the spring semester, and then did really the sort of background research for my PhD, so a lot of literature review. I did a bioinformatics project that semester. So my advisor was really flexible in just like the type of work that I could do, and wasn't particularly, like, oh, I need weekly reviews. It was just sort of, okay, you're just getting, it was the first year of my PhD, so you're just getting started. Obviously at that point you're really kind of thinking about what kind of project you might want to do. And so my advisor gave me a lot of flexibility to still work, but to use that time to do a lot of reading and thinking through kind of what I wanted my project to be. And so I think that is something too to think about, is not, and of course it depends on where you are in your dissertation or your work, But you can be flexible and kind of move things around a little bit. And, maybe it's not the semester for lab work, it's a semester for, writing your first paper or doing that. Maybe it's a meta-analysis you could complete, or, something that you can do maybe a little bit more from home, if possible. So I think the other thing from a financial standpoint, don't forget that, you can deduct kids from your taxes, you can deduct daycare from your taxes. So we put our daughter in daycare at 6 months, sort of after that first semester, stayed home. My husband and I were very flexible, kind of back and forth, kind of like Scott mentioned, just in, chunks of time to think and do work, because that can be challenging too. The other piece, at least at the time, so this was a little bit ago, my daughter's 15, so a graduate student salary, I qualified for food stamps. And that actually was a substantial grocery boost in helping out with sort of the financial aspect of kids. So certainly not, it was definitely a learning opportunity to kind of go through the system. But graduate student salary and a kid, you are below the poverty, or at least I was below the poverty line. And qualified for food stamps, and that included formula and a lot of expensive baby gear or sort of food type items. So yeah, look into, I would look into what you qualify for sure.
Swati?
So yeah, being in academia and a PhD student, I think, luckily there was flexibility. I had my first kid during my third year after I finished my comms. And I was initially a bit skeptical, worried to share the news, first of all. And I didn't know how it would impact, anything. But later on, I was more mature as a postdoc. But as a grad student, I was skeptical. But to my surprise, my PI was very supportive, But then, as a grad student, I got like 6 weeks of leave, which is actually quite less. I realized once I had my baby, 6 weeks just passed by, not knowingly when is the daytime, nighttime. It was just too fast. And I got back to the lab. It was very strange to leave the baby. And thankfully, my family had stepped up. My mom was with me, and she said she'd take care of the baby for 3 months, which was a great boon. So I urge everybody to ask for help. This is the time that anybody could help. So ask for help. I did, and I got. So, and even at work, everybody was so helpful. And during my pregnancy, I had undergrad helper who was taking care of my greenhouse plants, that hundreds of plants I had, and maintaining them, and lab work and so on. I asked for help and I got help. And then I took 6 weeks, but no, 8 weeks, which turned out 8 weeks, and then back to the lab. And it's still very difficult. But as a postdoc, I was more mature to tell I'm having a baby, and I got 12 weeks. 12 weeks, no, yeah, around, yeah. And then I was able to work on writing and other things from home. Mm-hmm. Also during that time, I could make use of my time at home. But it's still important that you are with your baby and bond with the baby during that phase. So I also spent a lot of time, most of my time, with my baby. But the guilt feeling keeps coming over and over that you're not doing science related work. But it was hard for me to balance that and come out of that guilt, which never goes away. Even now, it feels like during the pandemic, oh, you're not doing much with the kids at home, and so you try to come to work for a few hours and go back and so on. So it's this guilt feeling I'm still dealing with, but then there's a lot of support in the university system. I'm really thankful and glad for having such a nice environment and helpful people around, and facilities that we had at Michigan State University, for example, where I was a PhD and postdoc, that we had separate rooms to, either for nursing moms or even to pump milk and so on. And we had refrigerators and freezers to store, and everybody is so supportive and understanding not to use the room. So So they're all good people around, and but the thing is, you have to ask for help when there is a need, and you get help.
Yeah, that I just want to mention that. Yeah, I shared the pump room with Swati. We were several on our floor that had babies that same year. But I have to say that we had a luxury of being in a new building that had these resources, and people in other facilities might have a harder time. So you just have to go and ask. You're lucky if you're in the right spot at the right time, I guess. But this is really helpful, nice, different situation overview here. So it's like,
yeah, one of our audience members mentioned, and this is from Narendra, she mentioned one of my friends has CIHR postdoc funding in Canada, and she got 1 year paid childcare leave. So that might be something for those of you who are looking into PhDs or postdocs. If you are planning to start a family, there are other places that do look into, because the U.S. is definitely not the greatest with that. A lot of our other questions are based on, well, actually, maybe this one goes well with Eva's question. I'm a graduate student, and asking for accommodation has not been easy for me. For example, there aren't many options for field work appropriate clothing and maternity sizes, and when requested accommodation, it causes a lot of unhappiness with the staff or director at my center. Now I'm worried about asking help after my baby is born and after I return for things like space for pumping and leaving for work if I need to go get him from daycare. She'll be going to work 8 weeks after his birth, and so I was just kind of wondering how to navigate that kind of request without, burning bridges. Or I guess, do we want to start maybe with Kelly?
So yeah, so many things to say. I think the question, so the questions about physical or accommodations is kind of one piece. So let's hold on to that for a second. But the leaving early and, when can I do this or when can I do that? I actually wouldn't even have that conversation. The way that, and even to this day, I think about sort of my career and the way I lead my manager we have conversations about deliverables. What is it that and actually I lead that conversation. So here's what I'm going to get done. Here's my plan. I plan to have this done, and maybe they're to the level of wanting to know what you're doing weekly. My advisor never was. But right, like I plan to have sort of this set of results by this date. I plan to have, this chapter written by this date, so I would set deliverable goals. And then, if that meant that I was there, half days for a week, but I got everything done and I left, I didn't feel guilty about it, right? If I'm on track with the goals that we discussed, then there shouldn't be a conversation about how many hours you see me or what Saturday you've seen me in the lab. So I was very fortunate that was how my graduate advisor sort of thought too. That wasn't actually the way that my postdoc advisor thought. So I was very used to just having goal conversations and that was it. And at my postdoc, it was much more of, how many hours are you spending in the lab? I didn't see you here this weekend. And I was like, what are you talking about? That's not how you run. That's not how things go. But it was in that person's lab. And so, I really worked very hard to sort of reframe that conversation and just say, well, why? What is it? Do you think that goal that I set about, finishing this assay or I don't know what, by such and such date's not soon enough? Or, let's talk about you just keep bringing it back to that goal. And, it's not a conversation about how many hours or when you got there or when you left. It's more just what are you accomplishing by when, and stick to that. I think the clothing and the accommodations and the room for, pumping and nursing, that's really disappointing to hear that somebody's negative in that regard. They shouldn't be. I'm at a loss, honestly, for that part. Do any of the other panelists have a better idea of how to handle that conversation? That just makes me mad. I'm sorry.
Is it the question about physical readiness to go on the field and do the work? That could be really challenging. I would really ask for help, an undergrad help or any helper that would accomplish such physical tasks that a heavily pregnant woman cannot do, or even after delivering the baby, it's a bit challenging until certain time to do any physical work. And even for small things like carrying some heavy items into my office, I would ask my husband to put it in the evening, or and dealing with the greenhouse and things, I would ask for help, for an undergrad helper, or things like that. These are the things that you could certainly ask, and it's reasonable to ask.
Mm-hmm. And I think Eva mentioned sort of the OSHA safety requirements too. I mean, if you're physically unable to lift things, I mean, there's safety laws about accommodations that have to be made. I'm certain, I know they exist. I'm not sort of an expert in it, but I think that would be something for sure to look into, because I mean, yeah, physical safety is required.
All right. So we also have a lot of questions about how to decide when to have kids. Is there a good time to have a kid within a PhD program? Is there a good time within a postdoc program? Do you have any
No.
suggestions on what to consider, or maybe what to prepare? Some people are also thinking about having their second child while in a PhD program. So maybe just, kind of any comments or help you might be able to share there as far as what to consider. We can start with Lucas on this one.
Yeah, sure. I think it's implied in the laughter, but there's really no good or best time to do it. And I think Ava already mentioned this in her slides a little bit, that having kids younger, you're more likely to have more energy. And with the PhD program, generally, it's a lot more flexible, especially depending on the type of work you're doing. For me, I did a lot of biochemistry. Pretty much all of my work I had to do in the lab, but the hours are still flexible. So having kids during a PhD does afford that level of flexibility that you might not have depending on the type of job, if you get a typical 9-to-5 job when you're done or something. But yeah, like I was 24 when my first kid was born, so I was still fairly lively, and I think I still am today. Yeah, definitely have more energy. But yeah, I think that's definitely one of the advantages. I think I started going off track and lost track of what the question was.
About having a second child, I think it was related. You had a second child too now, yeah. So maybe you can.
Yeah. So yeah, when to have like the second child? Again, I think having them closer together allows more opportunity for your kids to play with each other. My kids are only 3 years apart, so they play together a lot now, and that's really fun to see. Whereas if you have one kid and you wait like 10 years to have another one, yeah, you have a larger gap, and where you're not dealing with multiple kids, because multiple kids is a whole new ball game compared to having one kid. But having them closer together, I mean, you're going to have more energy to deal with all of the challenges of having kids in general, and then having multiple kids. Yeah, I think like for me, that was just, I didn't plan on having kids in grad school at all, but that's what happened. And then deciding to have the second one, I think we felt like this isn't, having gone through having our first child for a couple of years, we felt like, yeah, we can do this. And we had figured out the different resources from the university and my wife's work that really helped us be parents and work. So we felt like, having a second one isn't going to be that bad, because we had kind of got used to how everything worked and felt ready to do it. So it's a process, and you have to kind of think about where you're at career-wise, you and your partner, and financially decide, can you support another child in your graduate program? Like, are you at a place where like it could potentially set you back, and you just have to consider all those things.
I think the other thing to consider too is that certainly there's like nice to haves when you have kids, and you know, multiple kids, one kid, kids close together, kids far apart. There's all kinds of families, and you make it, and your family is what it is, and you know, it's fun and it's a ride no matter what. And you know, there is no sort of right thing to do. You know, we like I said, I had one, my daughter, I only have one. You know, and then we were like, kind of like Lucas said, it was like, yeah, we should have another one, and then like, nope, that didn't happen. So one, you know, only child. And we've just absolutely loved our family. You know, so I think everybody's just, families are just what they are, and you make it work, and you know, they're kind of unique and quirky, and you know, you kind of set your priorities for your own family, and you just, you know, you kind of keep on keeping on, right? I think the financial question's an interesting one too. Certainly in the US, there's a huge amount of playing on, I would say, consumerism, playing on that parent guilt, and all the products you need to raise a child. And I might be a little soapboxy here for a moment, but I actually think the number of products you need to raise a child is like a tenth of what any of the websites say that you need. Like maybe even less, honestly. Like, I don't know. Like you can spend as much as you could possibly imagine on a child, and you know, you could basically raise a child on a shoestring budget. You just have to, you know, kind of that guilt, they play, the consumer culture plays on that guilt. And don't get me wrong, I'm, you know, kind of a part of it too, but um, you know, really just think about what you need. And sure, that nicer stroller would be nice, but like, really, you know, I mean, you know, I think there's a lot of stuff you could do to figure out the finances in a kind of shoestring budget sort of way.
And I believe that, you know, as you, you know, escalate in your career path, you're getting more and more responsibilities. They keep adding to it. So there's no right time. I mean, and I feel like having a kid in the grad school, I did a good thing, you know, because now I feel like I have a lot more responsibilities of having my own lab, having, you know, grad students and so on. I feel like, you know, it was a good time for me, and earlier on than now, if I have to think, you know, and also age wise, you know, I loved kids as a teenager, and I was sure I wanted kids in life, and I wanted my first kid at least before 30 years, and I had mine at 29, and I was happy for that achievement. I felt like there's great satisfaction and accomplishment, just like as if, you know, I published in a high impact journal. It was more than that, much more than that. So that happiness comes and satisfaction is with you, you know, and whatever happens, you feel good about, you know, having this accomplished. So it's completely my personal experience, but you know, I also recommend when friends talk that, you know, as your age progresses, as you escalate higher in your career, you have more responsibilities than less. So, you know, there's never a good time to plan. It's just when you want the kids.
Awesome. Scott, did you have anything to add to that one, or we can move to the next question, which is a really good one too?
Not too much to add to the specific question. I did just want to say one thing along the lines of what Kelly was talking about is with all the stuff you need, you might be really surprised at the generosity of your friends and your family, and
Yeah.
also just acquaintances. When people hear that you're expecting, they might say, oh, well, I've got this stroller just sitting around that I'm not using, for example, and you can have that. And then one more quick thing about finances is daycare is like a really big expense. Like, I'll be really open and frank and say that for my family, it's $6,000 a year for 3 days per week. But there's a scholarship through my university, and it's $1,000 for each semester, fall and spring. So for my family, that's 1/3 of our childcare budget is taken care of just from that scholarship alone. So there are ways to get help with that. Thanks.
Yeah, so we thank you to everybody who's been sending questions. We're actually probably time for about one more question, but I think that we'll end on this one, and it's, what are some strategies that help you successfully balance research and parenting? And also, how much do you rely on childcare to get work done? Maybe Satya, do you want to start with this one?
Sure. I relied a lot on childcare for work being done as a PhD student, as a postdoc, and even now. So, finding a really good childcare is very important so that you can peacefully work when you're working. Luckily, we had really good childcares within the university premises that you are very convinced that they take good care of your children when they're there, and you can go and look at them once in a while when you want to, and so on. I mean, that's really important, I think, to find a good childcare. And the advice I got when I was pregnant is to be in the line for that best childcare, which I'd never got until 1 year after my child is born. So it's also important, I think, the situation is similar in various other places where the best childcare has many people in the wait list, and you better be there in the wait list to get there. But it's really important. I say that you should trust the childcare and be peaceful at work, not thinking and worrying about how the child is being cared for.
Yeah, I would agree. We had a like a center daycare that our daughter went to. And I actually think, kind of in hindsight, given that she's an only child, her being in daycare since 6 months, I don't know. I mean, whose kid is perfectly well adjusted? However, the sort of positive peer pressure, the older kids potty training and the, she's watching them kind of thing and learning. There were some bad behaviors learned along the way too, but that happens. But I think, that was a really positive sort of socialization and kind of, atmosphere for her. But there are a lot of different options in childcare. I mean, sort of home care, nannies can be more expensive, but maybe if it's, somebody looking for sort of extra hours around the university, I mean, even shared in-home daycare, family members, like there's a lot of different ways to kind of think about either temporary solutions or permanent solutions. But yeah, I would agree. I think that sort of compartmentalization is really important.
Yeah.
Lucas or Scott?
For me, so I think there were two questions. One was about some general strategies to balance things, and then the second, which the other two have already commented on, about childcare. Yeah, childcare we absolutely relied on. I wouldn't have graduated without it. There's absolutely no way. Because both my wife and I worked. She's a teacher, so she had less flexibility than me. But we absolutely had to have childcare in order for both of us to work. And our kids, my first, he went to childcare when he was about 4 months old. My second, my wife didn't get a whole lot of leave, and I was getting toward the end of my PhD, so my second had to go to daycare sooner. I think he was 9 weeks, so that was really hard to have him there that early. But yeah, we absolutely needed it in order to continue doing our jobs. And for me, yeah, I would not have finished my program without it. So yeah, you really want to do your research and find a place that you're going to feel comfortable with. It's a task. And then, so for the other question, I jotted down a lot of stuff, but I'll just highlight a couple of, I think, my biggest pieces of advice and strategies. And the first I thought of was, you really, as a graduate student, you want to prioritize your work and set achievable goals. And then once you do that, you want to communicate that with your advisor or advisors. You want to make sure they know what you're thinking of, what your goals are, what your priorities are, and that you can have a mutual agreement on that. And then when I say priorities, I don't mean just professional, but what are your personal priorities as well? It's okay for your family to be as important, if not more important, than your work. And whatever that is, you have to communicate that to your advisor and help them to understand your situation. And then I think maybe one other thing, maybe two other things: seek a mentor who understands your situation, because you're going to need that encouragement as you progress through your PhD. If you have one early on, or a postdoc, whenever you have it, you're going to need that encouragement and advice. And then the last thing I would say is don't ever be ashamed of times when you feel like you're not getting enough work done. I definitely felt that way a lot. Like I'm just not getting as much done as I should, or not getting as much work done as my colleagues, and like they're already like they published a paper already and I'm still like doing all this work. So I think if I would have recognized earlier how important setting goals and priorities are, then I think I wouldn't have experienced that as much. But anyway, it's okay to get less done than your peers in terms of hours spent, because as Kelly already kind of alluded to, it's not really about the hours, it's about, are you meeting the goals that you and your advisor have agreed on?
Okay, I think we need to, it's a really great conversation. I would have kept on going for another half an hour, but I just wanted to summarize a couple of things of what we discussed here. Hopefully that's a good representation. Let me see if I can you see my slides?
No.
No. Let me see. I don't know. Oh, yeah. Okay. Katie need to do.
Yep.
We see him now.
Yep. Okay. So I just put here 3 points that I thought we could add some more than for a summary. But here are the main things that I found. It seems that there's no perfect time to start a family. I think that's an important point that we all need to remember. That you definitely need to ask for help and support. And there's a lot of resources that you might not know, or your PI would not know, or your HR didn't know. So I think it's important to network and ask for support. And work-wise, it's important to set your priorities and work towards specific goals. It seems that that's an important message from the panelists, that that will help you not get too crazy on try to balance your life needs and your work needs. And I think that's a skill that everybody should learn. And if having kids force you to do it, it might be a good thing. Okay. So with that, I just would like to thank the panelists again for their time and input to this conversation, and to all of you for attending. And I hope that was helpful. And I think, Katie, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I would just like to say, again, thank you all for joining us as panelists and for attending. We will be posting a recording of this within a few days, and we'd love to keep the conversation going. So when you do see the link for the recording, join in on the discussion. There'll be a comment spot within our blog, and also we'll be bringing some of these questions over to Twitter to see what the community thinks and see if we can get some answers. So yes, thank you all for joining, and we hope to see you at our next Plantae webinar.
Thank you for organizing, Ava.
Thank you for coming. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.